Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to another Big Finish Torchwood audio drama review. In today's review, I'm going to be taking a look at the 5th volume of Torchwood One, entitled I Hate Mondays, seeing a return of the brilliant Torchwood One team from Chanary Warf, being Yvonne Hartman, Ianto Jones, and of course the one, the only, Tommy. This release is available to order now on the Big Finish website on both physical CD and digital download, and can also be purchased as part of bundles alongside the previous releases within this series. So Torchwood One is always a delight. I think it's certainly an overlooked area of Torchwood at Big Finish. I think this series is very strong, and certainly the later volumes have been growing this brilliant personality for the series, and I always look forward to a new release coming around. I think every box set also feels quite the treat as well. Because of the way that this series is produced, we normally get maybe one box set a year, but they never tend to announce them in advance, so it feels like every box set could be the last, so when a new one comes out, it's always a really pleasant surprise, as was this one. This release is quite the emotional journey. We have 3 separate but interconnected stories penned between James Goss and Joseph Lister, 3 incredibly strong emotional scripts. We certainly get to know more about our Torchwood main protagonists within this set, and interestingly, and rather uniquely, if this box set isn't enough, there is also a supplementary release to this box set as well, which is the May 2024 release from the Torchwood monthly range, the 3rd and final story from the main range's Yantology, entitled Disco. I have done a separate review for that release, so go and check that out if you are interested, but the events of that story take place between episodes 2 and 3 within this set. So as stories go, Dinner for Yvonne is certainly a bold way to start off this collection of stories, and it absolutely sells the unique identity of this series as a whole, but also the strengths of the main protagonists. It's Monday night, the evening of the all-important local supper club, and this week it's Yvonne Hartman's time to host, having not hosted on her past 3 turns. Except Ianto Jones shows up on her doorstep right before the neighbours are due, with news that the world is ending, and Yvonne Hartman doesn't care one bit. The supper club must go ahead as planned, the neighbours mustn't know about Yvonne's real employment as confidentiality and all that, leaving Ianto Jones and Tommy to save the world from Yvonne's kitchen. This episode is as chaotic and fun as it sounds. It's one of the major strengths of this series as a whole, putting the protagonists in an utterly bizarre situation to deal with a big problem like the world ending. I love how this was done within the previous volume within the series, less majesty through a bedroom farce with one rolling scene throughout and many interruptions along the way. Dinner for Yvonne absolutely matches that energy. It's also an interesting insight into the after-hours life of Yvonne Hartman beyond the world of Torchwood, and I suppose that desperation to have a somewhat more normal life with normal friends, despite said friends being insufferable egotistical airheads. Yvonne refuses to take control of the major alien incident, and instead she must focus all of her energy and power into delivering a delightful 3-course meal, which also doesn't go to plan. I wonder why. The neighbours are such brilliant characters, the world revolves around them and you can't tell them otherwise. Diane and Ken have jobs in international charity work and high-end laser discos, as you do, which Ken takes very, very seriously. Jerry works in TV and Kiki has her own little knick-knack shop. So clearly all big and very important jobs, and absolutely nothing that Yvonne can understand as she merely works as a civil servant within the DVLA. I think it's truly testament to James Goss's writing style that this story works so well. It's a bold move to take something big like an alien invasion with drama and high stakes and say, no, we aren't focusing on that directly. Let's instead focus on this little suburban kitchen in this little house, as Diane says, to see how the world is going to end from there, and you know what, it works, and it elevates this story to being something entirely different rather than run-of-the-mill, which is what this series does best. The neighbours' chemistry, or even lack of it at points, is really gritty as it digs deep into the unique relationships between these characters, and you kind of feel like you're sat around this rather awkward dinner table throughout, the way that they can pull each other's strings, the underlying flirtatiousness between certain characters, and the awkward small talk. It truly highlights how ignorant these people are. But it also somewhat draws a big question mark over Yvonne Hartman's choice of friends outside of work. Again, that desperation to have a normal life, or lacking understanding into what friendship actually is and what Yvonne should actually get from it, because it's clear that Yvonne's neighbours, or so-called friends, aren't actually that nice. Whilst this story does focus around Yvonne and her annoying neighbours, Ianto and Tommy are still absolutely hilarious throughout and do absolutely shine, from the rather steamy action room that's been set up within Yvonne's kitchen to her own frustration. Ianto keeps a rather cool head throughout. Gareth's performance is always a joy to listen to. I love his continuous updates on how the disaster is unfolding, always throwing Yvonne off. He's definitely the glue which holds this unit together, and I just love how he's very level-headed and to the point. Meanwhile, Yvonne's there juggling plates of food. Meanwhile, you have Tommy, and he had me cackling, honestly cackling. This episode is an exploration of his many unknown talents, and Timothy Bentinck absolutely shines. His blunt northernness is a delight. The way that he mingles with the wannabe upper classes is hilarious. He's such a strong character overall, and I always look forward to hearing more from him. And it's interesting who's cool under this situation, because we have Yvonne absolutely losing her mind, and we see a more vulnerable side to the character. And then we have Tommy being rather level-headed, saving the world, creating this action plan, getting the job done, whilst also cooking food in a rather professional way, or sipping on wine and generally having a nice time. He's basically the champion of spinning so many plates at once. The whole sound design of this story is also practically very effective. It's something that I often overlook, and I really shouldn't. It truly brings the story alive, especially during these multitasking scenes between the kitchen and the living room. Tommy getting their hands dirty within the kitchen, creating the different meals, the plates whacking from side to side, the cutlery going everywhere. It all feels very real. Even the clattering of pans, the boiling of water and chopping food. It's physical and very energetic, and I think that the performances given also feel quite claustrophobic. Therefore, you are very within this environment, you're immersed within the experience. And as I say, it's interesting seeing Yvonne within the heart of this, who is normally very calm, very to the point, always one step ahead, not within this story, because she is so focused around creating this meal, getting these random neighbours to like her, that she doesn't actually make the right choices, and everyone else must step up. So it's a really, really interesting story, but also a lot of fun. I in fact listened to this episode and I enjoyed it so much, and I listened to it again the following day. I'm kind of frustrated because I feel like I'm not getting across the energy and happiness I felt when listening to this episode. It's a release to be experienced, and I think that very much applies particularly to this story, but somewhat the other episodes within this set as well. What I will say is, if you are invested by this era within Torchwood, then you will absolutely enjoy this box set. By Royal Appointment is the second episode of the set, and we are back in the hustle and bustle of London City, Chanary Warf, and Poppy Greenleaf is a new lady in waiting for Her Majesty, with a job of overseeing Torchwood. She wants to know exactly what this organisation is all about, so she shows up to Yvonne's frustration, and from there we embark on a deep dive into the day in the life of working as Torchwood's head, and Poppy's world is changed forever, and she also receives a bit of trauma along the way as well. Does she regret even asking in the first place? Probably a little bit. This episode does feel very broad in scope, and a big leap from the previous story. We are back in the corporate world of Torchwood One, rather than Yvonne's small kitchen. We venture around many London locations, and it's nice to have that variety, I think, within story location. It shows what this series can do. It gives each story an individual identity. Again, this story is quite Yvonne-focused, at least Poppy and Yvonne-focused. It's a very interesting relationship. Tommy brilliantly calls Poppy the competition winner, and it's a very, very accurate description of kind of the role she fills. Isabella Pappas is great as Poppy Greenleaf, a vibrant, intelligent individual from a very different world. She has confidence, but also that uncensored humanity, which I think is rare in the corridors of Torchwood. And I think that this makes listening to her reaction to the experience quite interesting, certainly for us listeners. It also gives Tracy Ann Oberman a great character to riff off throughout, really showing Yvonne at the top of her game, making these big decisions and always being one step ahead. Again, a perfect contrast to the previous story. It has to be said, Tommy and Ianto fans have less things to be excited about within this one. Tommy is an all-round everything within this story. He chauffeurs Yvonne around London, he pilots helicopters. He's more of a support character within this episode, but he still does a great job of what he is given. He still has a very memorable presence, which again is testament to Tim Bentinck's acting overall and being able to stamp a mark on a story, even when you have minimal scenes. As for Ianto, it's a difficult one. He has his own story within this box set, which beautifully ties all 3 episodes together, but the storyline is never the main focus, and I like how this illustrates that no matter what goes on in life, everything still keeps ticking around you. He is barely present within this story. In fact, he is off work to start with at the very beginning, and I think it's really important for Ianto fans to experience this set as it's an important moment within his life, but don't go in expecting full-on character pieces because that doesn't happen for all 3 stories. In fact, the lack of Tommy and Ianto within this episode is certainly made up for within the 3rd episode of this set, and if you've listened to Torchwood Disco, of course the monthly range release which also came out in May of 2024, then this box set is a perfect complement to that, as we basically see the repercussions of where Ianto was within sort of the break between the last episode and this one, within this story and the next one, so they work very well together. And if you are aware of what the plot line is for Torchwood Disco, then no doubt you can fill in the gaps and understand why this box set is such an important one within Ianto's journey. The threats and foes within this episode are a lot of fun. They aren't centre stage. You could argue maybe they're a tad underdeveloped, but I don't really care, as this episode is solely focused around the Torchwood employees plus Poppy. Although special mention should be given to the Dimension of Light, which is a very fun, albeit brief character. And that's the beauty of this series overall. Us as listeners do know what is coming when it comes to the big threats that Torchwood One will face. Of course, the Battle of Chanary Warf. So character pieces like this, commentating on Torchwood's role, power, it's all foreshadowing the grim events. It always puts me on edge as a listener. It's like listening to a historical documentary where everyone's heading for disaster and you love these characters and you don't want what is going to happen to them to actually happen. Maybe Yvonne gets a little bit of a warning in this story, but does she listen? That is the big question. What I also love about this series is that it really uses the audio format to the listener's advantage, and that doesn't mean it's always big monsters and doomsday scenarios like the previous story simply set within a house. It's still so bold, it's stimulating for the imagination, and there is always so much going on. The characters are incredibly rich with personality, and the situations that they find themselves within can be quite scary and bizarre. There is no mundane at Torchwood One, no downtime, and because of that, as a listener, I always feel so on board with these box sets, simply because they're so enjoyable, fast-paced, but a great mix of deep, stressful moments and hilarious moments as well. And that's the thing, I don't think that I can actually do episode 2 justice by simply talking about it, but again, I found it enjoyable, and it's an episode I think to certainly be experienced. What I do like with By Royal Appointment is that it's one of those episodes where Yvonne feels like she is holding a lot of the pieces, and then slowly as the episode creeps on, a little bit of mystery comes in. Maybe she doesn't hold all of the pieces. I think for quite a lot of it as a listener, I felt quite oblivious, but I somewhat enjoyed that because you feel like Yvonne is a bit of a comfort blanket. You know what Yvonne's doing, she'll be fine, everything will go well, but in reality, disaster can strike at any moment, and this episode explores that in a really effective, but also entertaining way. So within the previous story, I mentioned the absence of Ianto and Tommy. We're about to turn that on its head with Nerves, the 3rd and final episode of this box set, as written by Joseph Lister. This episode is basically Yvonne light, and it's quite the emotional blow. Balance is something that this series always seems to do very well. All 3 protagonists get time to shine throughout this set, they all feel well served, and whilst Tommy and Ianto don't have their own individual character-focused stories, this episode brings those 2 personalities together in what makes for a rather special installment of the series. It's a turning point. So Tommy is about to begin an early commute to the South Downs, transporting a nerve gas, which is of course a dangerous alien nerve gas, to a secure location. But unbeknownst to him, Ianto is also joining him on the journey as well, with his rather planned schedule, unlike Tommy's, which is basically just to wing it. I'll admit, I didn't really have much expectation for this story, simply because I was so impressed with the previous 2, and I thought this would just be a fairly alright episode to end off the set, something simple but fun. But no, Nerves exceeded my expectation and had me utterly evolved and emotionally torn apart. There's going to be lots of elements I'm not going to speak about within this review. I think the main event in particular I'm going to avoid as best as I can, but yes, I was gripped throughout, and my jaw, I'm pretty sure, hit the floor multiple times. I think trapping Tommy and Ianto in a car for any period of time is going to be quite interesting, as their relationship is unusual, which Lister's writing examines under a microscope in such beautiful detail. Ianto certainly has life problems, especially at the minute. Tommy is problematic. It's a perfect blend, and hearing them have this small talk within the early minutes of this episode is so authentically difficult and awkward. From 15 minutes in, however, things take a turn, which is an understatement, and this story once more solidified for me why Torchwood One works so well. Yes, they are colleagues, but they are also bonded by so much more. I was absolutely blown away by Tim Bentinck's performance within this episode. There are so many layers to Tommy's character, and yet there is lots of his past which is still quite unknown. He's been employed at Torchwood for years, and this definitely takes its toll. He's rough around the edges, he gets the job done, he's a bit of a botcher, but clearly he is very smart. Due to, of course, being a man from a certain era, Tommy is also a figure who rarely shows vulnerability. But I think occasionally, through small one-liners and slips of the tongue when caught off guard, clearly this character shows that he cares about those around him, the likes of Ianto in particular. And he's also so bloody funny. Every single episode has these wonderful one-liners which always make me smile. Likewise, Gareth David Lloyd displays such range within this episode. He's been on quite the journey throughout this set. He's back at work having had some time away, and he is still reflecting on those recent events. He can't handle extreme circumstances well, and can't be relied upon in emergency situations without going into a somewhat state of shock. Gareth David Lloyd portrays this incredibly, and the way it is used to uncover his closer bond with Tommy as the story progresses is actually quite emotional. Do also bear in mind at this point in time the age of Ianto Jones that he is meant to be. This is literally one of his first jobs outside of education, which makes his struggles all the more painful. It is only fair that I mention Lou Caulfield and James N. Gunn as Pam and Harvey respectively. This story is essentially a four-hander, and I instantly taken to these characters being plunged into the world of Torchwood. They are far more than merely supporting roles, and I felt engaged with their life stories. They create both the hurdles and the revelations for our main protagonists, which challenge their relationship further. Again, this is in fact another story that I listened to twice out of sheer enjoyment, and it certainly has that re-listenable factor, because each time you pick up little references that you may have missed first time round, and therefore your appreciation for the story grows even more. And to be honest, that also applies for all of the stories within this box set. As you can tell, this has been a rather long review because the stories are so rich with detail and things to discuss. Much like Ianto and Tommy, Pam and Harvey are troubled characters, their lives impacted by complex relationships and many life problems, which then go on to influence how they act, especially in disaster situations when they are close to death. So after an event of which that I won't mention, well, you know the nerve gas I spoke about before? Well, said nerve gas is now leaking everywhere. So everyone is screwed, pretty much. The Torchwood team must put a lid on the situation, quite literally, working alone, away from Torchwood One in Chanary Warf, but every step for progress is greeted by more challenges because they're basically in the middle of a main road, with no resources anywhere. And Pam and Harvey are another two obstacles introduced to the mix as well. Tommy just wants to get on, meanwhile Ianto is somewhat looking after Pam and Harvey, but also dealing with his own issues. And what occurs from this point onwards is a long and grueling collection of scenes until the story's end, which doesn't particularly sound that enjoyable, but it is. The events feel like a dragging apocalyptic scenario. My heart was racing, and I did really fear for our main protagonists, especially because I've enjoyed listening to them blossom throughout this series to date. Every line of dialogue is very powerful and emotional, opening past wounds and dealing with the present, and if you enjoy Torchwood One and if you feel engaged with these characters, then this is absolutely a story not to be missed. It's an incredibly strong piece of writing by Joseph Lister, poignant and unforgettable, and I say that as someone who is picking up the back end of this review to record a few months after having listened to the box set, because I suddenly became quite busy, and I'm pretty sure I also lost some of the audio recording as well. And even now, recording months after the initial listen, this story is still incredibly vivid within my mind. So there we go, that is Torchwood One, I Hate Mondays, an incredibly strong box set, yet 3 rather varied adventures. I don't want to pick a favourite from this box set, because they all do incredibly different things. The first episode had me laughing and howling, the second episode really shows off the variety of this series, and again, the versatility, you have the action, you have the fun, you have the humour, but then we have the third episode, which is basically an emotional gut punch, so you have the entire spectrum of emotion being delivered within this box set. I think particularly if you've enjoyed the previous releases, then you'll get a lot of enjoyment from this volume as well. I just hope that we get to hear more from this team in the future. So this has already been quite a long review, so I do apologise. I'm going to stop talking now, but I do definitely recommend this one, and it is another perfect example of why Torchwood is most certainly well and truly at home with Big Finish. So thanks for watching, have a nice day, and I shall see you all next time.